Stop what you're doing for a second, because this is one of those sports moments that sounds fake until you see the numbers. Caitlin Clark didn't drop 35 points. She didn't hit a logo three. She didn't even step on a court. She sat behind a microphone, and somehow she helped deliver the most watched Sunday night NBA regular season broadcast in more than 2 decades. Think about how insane that is. The NBA has spent years trying to stabilize ratings. They've tweaked schedules, chased younger viewers, flooded social media, pushed stars nonstop, and still the viewership swings up and down like a roller coaster. Then one night, NBC adds Caitlin Clark to the analyst desk, and the numbers jump like someone flipped a switch. Lakers versus Knicks at Madison Square Garden was already going to do well. That's a classic matchup. 2 massive brands, big market energy, and the kind of game casual fans will watch even if they don't follow the standings. But NBC made a calculated move. They didn't just rely on the game. They added Clark alongside a stacked crew: Maria Taylor, Carmelo Anthony, Reggie Miller, and suddenly the broadcast felt like an event. The result? Around 4.5 million viewers, with a peak near 5 million. And the sports media world immediately went into scramble mode. Because here's what nobody wants to say out loud. This wasn't just a good guest appearance. This was proof of something the industry has been dancing around for months. Caitlin Clark isn't a popular WNBA player. She's a cross-league magnet. She's the kind of figure who can pull people into basketball content, whether she's playing, talking, warming up, or literally just existing on screen. That's not normal celebrity. That's the rarest kind of sports currency, attention that actually converts. And you could see it in real time. NBC executives weren't quietly satisfied. They were openly glowing. The praise wasn't generic either. They weren't saying, "She did great for her first time." They were pointing out her composure, her IQ, how naturally she explained the game. Translation? They're thinking, this is a solution, not just for one broadcast, for the future. Because the scary part for everyone else is that this didn't look like a gimmick. It looked like a new model. One where the most valuable voice in basketball media might not come from the NBA pipeline at all. And once that door opens, it doesn't close again. But of course, not everyone is celebrating. Because when someone walks in and changes the rules without asking permission, the gatekeepers don't clap. They panic. And what's happening behind the scenes right now? It's way messier than the headlines are admitting. That's where we get into the backlash, the industry jealousy, and why other networks are already making moves that could change sports broadcasting permanently. The public reaction to Caitlin Clark's NBC debut was exactly what you'd expect. Praise, shock, and a lot of, wait, she's actually good at this. But behind the scenes, a very different conversation started almost instantly. Because Caitlin Clark didn't just have a strong showing on television, she committed the most unforgivable sin in the sports media world. She walked into a room people have spent 20 years trying to get into, and looked like she belonged there in 5 minutes. And that triggers something in industries with tight gatekeeping, especially sports broadcasting, where the traditional path is practically treated like religion. You know the path. Start local. Grind in small markets. Work sidelines. Wait for someone to retire. Smile through years of awkward interviews. Then maybe you get a seat at the big desk. Clark didn't do that. She didn't climb the ladder. She parachuted onto the roof. And the moment the ratings hit, you could practically hear the resentment forming. Not from fans, from professionals. There were whispers that she wasn't qualified, that it was just hype, that NBC was using her as a publicity trick, that the novelty would wear off, that she didn't pay her dues. And then the comments got uglier. Some people implied she was only there because of looks. Others framed it as affirmative action for ratings. Others were angry because they'd spent years building careers, and she got a spotlight they'd been chasing forever. But here's the part that destroys every one of those arguments. The audience didn't show up because NBC told them to. The audience showed up because Caitlin Clark is one of the few athletes alive who can move viewers across platforms, across leagues, across demographics, and that's what scares people. Because when the numbers are that loud, the conversation stops being about fairness. It becomes about value. NBC didn't put Clark on air as a charity move. They did it because they're trying to solve the same problem every network is facing: Younger audiences are drifting, attention spans are shrinking, and traditional sports broadcasts don't feel essential anymore. Clark made it feel essential. She didn't sound like a rehearsed talking head. She didn't float through generic takes. She was confident, sharp, and direct, the kind of presence that makes you lean forward even if you weren't planning to watch. And that's why the backlash is so intense, because the people criticizing her aren't really mad about credentials. They're mad about the implication. If Caitlin Clark can do this now, what does that say about the system? What does that say about the years of paying dues model? It suggests something brutal. The audience doesn't care about the latter. They care about the spark. And once executives realize that, the entire sports media industry gets rewritten. But here's where the story gets even crazier. Because this wasn't just NBC celebrating a good night. Other networks saw the same numbers, and they started making calls immediately. That's where we talk about the bidding war forming behind the scenes, and why some networks may be preparing to throw ridiculous money at Caitlin Clark while she's still an active player. The wildest part of this story isn't what happened on Sunday night. It's what happened the next morning. Because before the official ratings were even fully processed, the sports media world was already moving. Executives didn't wait for a press release. They didn't wait for analysts to explain it. They didn't wait for a second broadcast to confirm it. They saw one thing. A single Caitlin Clark appearance helped deliver the biggest Sunday night NBA regular season audience in more than 20 years. And the reaction across the industry was immediate. Calls, texts, meetings, quiet conversations with agents, internal memos, competing networks suddenly asking the same question at the exact same time. How do we get her? Because this isn't just about Caitlin Clark being popular. It's about the terrifying reality that she might be the most valuable attention driver in basketball, period. And for networks, attention isn't a nice bonus. It's the whole business. Broadcasting rights cost billions. Production costs are enormous. Talent salaries are huge. Marketing budgets are nonstop. And despite all that, ratings across sports have become harder to predict every year. The NBA has tried everything to stop the bleeding. More social clips, more star promotion, more events, more narrative packaging. But nothing creates certainty like a proven audience magnet. And Caitlin Clark just showed she can bring viewers to an NBA broadcast without even playing in the NBA. That's not normal. That's a unicorn. Now here's where it gets even more insane. Word around the industry is that at least 2 major networks have already explored longer-term offers, not just come back once or twice, not just guest spots, real deals, multi-year plans, prime desk placement, serious money. And the most shocking part, she's still an active player. She's still in the middle of building her WNBA career. She's still supposed to be focused on the Indiana Fever, her development, her season, her future. But the networks don't care. They're not thinking like basketball fans. They're thinking like people staring at a spreadsheet that says, Caitlin Clark equals millions of viewers. And once that's proven, the industry stops being patient. This is how you know something bigger is happening. Because they aren't chasing her only for her basketball knowledge, even though she clearly has it. They're chasing her because she does something almost no one else can do in 2025 sports media. She pulls in hardcore fans, casual fans, young fans, older fans, men, women, people who don't even like the NBA anymore, all at the same time. That crossover appeal is priceless, and it's why the entire broadcasting model is starting to wobble. For decades, the industry rewarded seniority. Now it's being forced to reward connection. And if Caitlin Clark becomes the blueprint, the old guard isn't just annoyed, they're in danger. But there's another layer to this story that makes it even more complicated. Because while the NBA world is celebrating what she did for them, a lot of people inside women's basketball are asking a much darker question. Is this actually good for the WNBA? That's where we get into the uncomfortable tension. Why some WNBA voices feel weird about this moment, and why Caitlin's crossover success could either elevate the league or expose how little the system values women's basketball on its own. On paper, Caitlin Clark breaking into NBA media should feel like a pure win. More visibility, more respect, more proof that women's basketball players belong on the biggest stages, the kind of breakthrough people have been demanding for decades. But the deeper you look, the more complicated it gets. Because the celebration around Sunday night wasn't really framed as, look how far women's basketball has come. It was framed as, look what Caitlin Clark can do for the NBA. And that difference matters a lot. The most marketable player in women's basketball history just helped set a major NBA ratings milestone. And most of the sports world responded by treating it like she was a missing ingredient for men's basketball, not women's. And inside women's basketball circles, that has sparked a quiet tension that most mainstream coverage doesn't want to touch. Because think about it from their perspective. The WNBA has spent decades fighting for attention, fighting for better time slots, fighting for serious promotion, fighting to be treated like a legitimate product instead of an occasional nice story. Then the biggest star the league has ever produced steps onto a national platform, and the world instantly focuses on how she can boost the NBA. That's the part that stings. Not because Caitlin did anything wrong, she didn't, but because it exposes a hard truth about how the sports ecosystem works. Women's sports are often treated as valuable only when they serve men's sports. And if you've been grinding in that space for 20 years, you're going to have complicated feelings when the most historic women's basketball moment in a generation becomes a headline about NBA ratings. Some people see it as progress. Others see it as the same old pattern with a new face. And the scary part is, both sides have a point. Because yes, Caitlin being on NBC helps normalize women as basketball authorities. It opens doors. It proves audiences will watch. It forces networks to invest in women's voices because the business case is now undeniable. But it also raises a question the WNBA cannot afford to ignore. If Caitlin Clark is powerful enough to lift NBA broadcasts, why isn't the WNBA building an entire empire around her inside its own league? Why did it take a men's broadcast to fully showcase her reach? Why are networks willing to spend millions to attach her to the NBA desk, but still hesitant to consistently elevate WNBA coverage with that same energy? That contradiction is the real story. Because Caitlin's crossover success isn't just a personal milestone, it's a spotlight. And what that spotlight reveals is uncomfortable. The audience is there. The appetite is there. The star power is there. The only missing ingredient has been institutional urgency. And this is where things get interesting, because Caitlin herself seems to understand that. She's not acting like someone chasing fame for fame's sake. She's acting like someone who knows she's holding a lever that could move the entire sport. Which leads to the final piece of this puzzle. What does Caitlin Clark actually want to do with all this power? Because what she said recently, quietly, without hype, suggests she's thinking bigger than just ratings and contracts. That's where we talk about Caitlin's mindset, her long game strategy, the pressure she's about to face, and why the next 12 months could reshape sports media and women's basketball permanently.